Hi there, my name is Steven, and welcome back to C#, .NET, and Windows. I'm here to teach you about complex variables this time. Now, I may seem a little bit frazzled, I may seem a little bit frustrated, and that would be because I am. I have recorded this video twice now, only to find that my recording software was not recording my voice. So, yeah. Super frustrating, but we're going to trudge through, and I simply want to cover complex variables. What is a complex variable? How do we use it? How do we describe it? And how do we define it? And then, ultimately, what's the impact on our application? We're going to be talking about our grocery list application, or our first application that we've been using since episode 1. You may wonder why I have this slide up. That's because we're going to be talking about human, and human as a definition of a creature, or a human being as an animal, so to speak. Think back to your 7th grade, 6th grade science class, talking about basically how classifications of animals come about. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species? I don't remember that well. So anyway, that's not that important, but I don't actually even know if that's the order, but think of it in that facet. As a disclaimer, this is not meant to target or focus on anybody specifically. This is not me talking about current issues or LGBTQ or anything like that. I'm talking purely about physiological classification, simply because that's how, as a programmer, you would code something. So I apologize if this is offensive in any way, shape, or form. It's not intended that way. So please think of this moving forward, for the human class anyway, specifically as just the physiological differences and commonalities. A human being may have hair, eyes, facial hair, may have a weightlifting capacity, maybe weight, actual physical weight is a property, height would be a property, facial shape, maybe if you describe one as an egg or an oval or a square or what have you. Those are all things that you could describe somebody as by seeing a photo of them. Think of those as properties. A property could also be a human name or a human profession or something along those lines, if you want to get into that realm. In this case, once again, sticking with just physiological traits observable through a photo. Human is a very generic term. We have, 7 billion humans on this planet. So you can look at all of the photos you want to of people and describe them and find common values or common things that you observe by that. I'm going to be referencing hair a lot because that's one of the easier ones. Same with height and weight, because they're easy to define with primitives rather than having to create our own variables, our other complex. And actually, hair could be a complex variable in and of itself. So that'll be kind of my example of a complex variable as a property. So human, we've pretty well defined. Has hair, maybe doesn't have hair, has eyes, has a nose, has mouth, arms, legs, height, weight, etc. But you can even further define by creating a child class, which is to say you have another class that inherits those common properties from human. So all humans genetically have commonalities, like lungs or a heart or what have you, skin. But a female may have other properties, like perhaps earrings, or may have a value referencing ability to bear children, or it may seem gruesome, and it's not meant, or not gruesome, it may seem graphic, I guess, but it's not meant to be, reproductive organs, you may have, or you would likely, in a physiological sense, have reproductive organs different for a female than you would, say, a male. So that might be a property that you keep track of, depending on what you're developing, for the female class that inherits all of the common values, but expands on those common values to be specific to a female. I was going to use voice tone as well, but most people have vocal tones as well, so that would go into the human class. Male is going to have height and weight just the same, going to have those common values, maybe like hair color, hair length, or what have you, which again, hair could be its own complex, and arguably most of the human body could be just a series of complex properties and variables. But a male may have, again, different reproductive organs, maybe a different physiological structure, muscle structure, or weight lifting capacity in some cases. Facial hair, though, is one that's really easy to define because most women don't really have facial hair. They do have the capability to grow facial hair, but you're going to most often see that in men. So you could have a complete other property added as an expansion of human for male. So the male slide here may, in this case, this male does not have a facial hair property because he doesn't have a beard, but might be cut of jeans even. Now you could go into a separate class, completely a separate object for apparel, because clothing is, everything might be made out of textiles, but then you would have a shirt subclass or pants subclass, and then you'd have material. So you can see how it can get really complicated and why they're called complex variables and objects, because it very quickly forces you into realizing how complex nature is. And this is just nature. This is not even talking about things like cars, things like airplanes, or even things as simple as trees. When you look out a window, I've got a window over there. When you look out a window and you see a tree, or maybe you're outside and you see a tree, you see that it may have bark, it might have needles, it might have leaves, branches, a trunk, a specific height that it can get to. Some trees can grow 4 feet tall. Others can grow upwards of maybe 100 feet or taller. I don't have a measure of how tall trees get. But nature is complex. Man-made objects like cars, one wheels, I say that because I just got my one wheel, an electric guitar, a phone, things like that are all described by properties as well. How you decide to define those properties will be based entirely on relevance to your specific use case. Let's jump into how do we use this in C#? How do we make a complex variable? Come on. There we go. Here we go. Once again, I have made this video twice already. It's because I was trying some fancy things with multiple recording, because I'm looking at moving to my DSLR, but then I lost the AC adapter that I bought, and I can't find my battery charger because we're hopefully moving soon, and I packed it somewhere. So I had to order a couple of new things. So when I get to that point, I'll be doing a proper test, and I will be probably sticking to that concept. I've got to figure out why Audition is not recording my voice. But you may also hear my younger son screaming in the background because my wife is not paying attention to him. He is 4 months old, and quite frankly, it's exhausting. So bear with me. I apologize if you hear any noise in the background. But let's jump back in. I keep saying jump because I'm just full of energy. So I have Visual Studio open. And I have my first application solution open, which if you don't have it already, please open it now. I have Solution Explorer off to the side here because we're going to be jumping into this a couple of times, and it's important for you to see what I'm doing. This is called a CS Proj file. I think we talked about this in episode 1. If you haven't checked it out, I do recommend you start the series from the beginning. Otherwise, some of this is going to get very complicated very soon. And if you don't have a basic understanding of episode 2, which was primitives, it's going to be a little bit annoying to try to figure out what I'm doing. Anyway, so we're going to right-click on our first application, and we're going to click Add and New Folder. I like to use folders in my solutions to specify some logical or logistic classifications of things. In this case, I'm going to organize by, in this case, objects. From here, you can actually, anywhere in Windows, if you don't know this, anywhere in Windows, if you have something highlighted like objects is right now, you can hit Shift F10, and it will essentially right-click for you. I like keyboard shortcuts. So from here, we're going to go to our top option, which is Add, and then our bottom option, which is Class. Make sure that it's Visual C# Items classification. We're grabbing our class, which has this lovely little icon as of this recording. It's an empty class definition. Make sure that it is this, because if you get into more complex solutions, you're going to have some extensions in Visual Studio that might create preloaded classes or items that you don't necessarily want involved in your program that could overcomplicate and confuse you. We're going to give it a name. In this case, because of the nature of our program, I'm going to name this Grocery List. Grocery List is going to be our parent structure. I don't plan on getting into complex items just yet, but I might. So I want to leave this open for inheritance as well. Grocery List is not really going to be inheritable, but I could easily instead make this just a list, because maybe this application is a grocery list, or maybe it's also a to-do list application, and we have a specific list type that is going to say this is a grocery list or this is a to-do list. And maybe they're not that different. Maybe you can just combine them into one anyway. In this case, I'm going to keep it as simple as possible and call it a grocery list. From here, Visual Studio gives us this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful shortcut called prop, which is short for property. So you type in prop inside of your class and nowhere else. I don't think it would work anywhere else. And you hit your tab key twice, and that will auto-create the syntax for the getter setter, which we'll talk about in variables and methods, which will likely come after this episode. Creates a getter setter for you. In this case, I'm going to call this one name, because I want to be able to give my grocery list a name, like Steven's grocery list or Steven's wife's grocery list. Can't remember if I've mentioned her name in previous videos, so if I haven't, not saying her name right now. Let me know if I've said my wife's name in previous videos. I'm sure she'll want me to go back and edit that out, actually. Anyway, so my list is going to have a name. My list is also going to have a date time created date. So, why date time? What is date time? It sounds really straightforward because you can probably guess it stores a date and a time that I pass into it or I give it. It's also really complicated because there's a bunch of ways to format dates. There's a bunch of ways to format times. There's a bunch of ways to display or retain or edit or update, etc. Date time is actually one of the more complex data types, but we're going to use it anyway in the most basic form we possibly can. We're not worried about saving this data at the moment, so I'm just going to keep created date the way that it is. Now, I named it created date because naming conventions are important. You will develop your own naming conventions as you get further into the profession and into the skill set. I like to keep my names as common as possible because my class name is going to give me my context, my relevance. Grocery list dot name is way less complicated and redundant than grocery list dot grocery list name or grocery list dot grocery list created date. Now, I could say created here instead of created date, but I like to use the ed form, the past tense form of a verb to talk about or to describe a Boolean value. So is active. Actually, that's a really bad example because it doesn't even use the naming convention I just said. Activated, or created, or deleted, or updated. In this case, created date tells me exactly what I should expect. It is the date on which this list was created. Next up, I'm going to create a list because we have a list of items for this grocery list. And this, I'm just going to store the names. Now, when I'm jumping through, let me walk through this real quick. I'm going to do my prop and then double tab. It immediately highlights my data type in this case. In this case, it's int. So I can immediately start typing out my data type. Then I can hit tab again, and it should jump me over to the name. And in this case, I'm going to say, in my grocery list, I'm going to have, whoops. I don't want grocery in that. Whoops. I don't want grocery in the name specifically. I would rather have it be items because that fits more appropriately with, like I said, what my naming convention was earlier. So it'll be grocery list name, grocery list created date, grocery list items. It's way easier for me to describe or to know and read what I'm doing with the object and what properties I'm referencing simply by reading grocery list dot items or dot created date, dot name. If this were human, you could have name, you could have profession, you could have wears clothing, could be lives location or home location or whatever. They can get as complex or as simple as you want them to. I would say that you should tailor your objects specifically to the job that you're doing. And actually, if you decide that you want to create a library of common objects that you use or create across all of your projects, that wouldn't be a bad idea either. We can talk about how to reference external libraries in another video. So this is it. This is a complex variable that we've created. This is simply a variable object that we have given our own properties to. It's not a pre-baked class that is included in C#. This is something that we've made and custom tailored to where for our application. So how do we implement this? And do I want to implement this? Well, why create it if I don't want to use it, right? You'd be surprised at how quickly some programmers will just jump into creating classes without saying, hey, am I going to use this or not? A lot of them over time kind of wear that mentality out and start to create only relevant objects. And actually, when you get into developing your programs, you will find that an hour spent designing your application and thinking about your application saves you like 5.5 hours of troubleshooting why it doesn't work later on down the road if you were to just go through and start writing the program right away. I don't design first very often, and that's a problem. And I've been working on that actually because I want to be a software architect. I want to be able to help people write code that is maintainable and useful and saves us a bunch of time. But it takes practice breaking the habits that I learned in college. So I'm going to make sure I save all of my stuff. I have my grocery list here. I like to pin this. This little pin keeps it to the left, I believe. Yeah, it doesn't let you drag it away. It also makes it harder to close it. But you can also right click on your pinned items and you can close all but this or all but the pinned items. I like to keep this here just because then it keeps it from like moving over and then I have to select it from a list. It's a whole thing. So we're only working with 3 classes or 3 files, so it's not that big of a deal, but it is what it is. So now I'm gonna have to make some nominal front end edits. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I don't need to do that, but I'm going to expand this out. This isn't overly important for you to follow along with, but if you want to, you absolutely can. Copy, you darn thing. Okay, my keyboard copy paste is not behaving, but that's fine. I will choose my properties here real quick. For my list box 1, scroll down, change this to list grocery lists. This one is no longer going to be list values. This will be list items. Actually, no, this will be list groceries per list. And I name it that way so I know what that list item is specifically relevant to. I'm going to get rid of my output values. Tighten that up a little bit. Make sure that it looks good by hitting my start button. If I have an error. Oh, I seem to have accidentally created multiples of something. Control-C, Control-V confuses me sometimes, apparently. So this is retaining the changes that I made previously in a previous video. So I'm actually going to get rid of that because it's no longer relevant. I'm going to get rid of that. Actually, no, I don't want to get rid of that because that will... Yeah, I don't want to get rid of that because this is my validation for that same grocery list item. So in this case, I have this blank application where I'm going to be able to add items. And actually, I think I will move this over like that. This is going to be annoying. Yes. So frustrating. Windows Forms. Darn you. We should be able to... You know what? That'll be fine. And we'll get rid of add. Or we'll get rid of the value and just call it add. So now when we select a grocery list, we're going to be able to add an item to it. I also need to copy, paste. I'm doing it the long way around because apparently it doesn't like my Control-C, Control-V. And this will be btn create list. And this will be text list name. Now technically this should be text grocery list name. Important to name things properly. And we'll create an event handler. I'm going to copy my form validation from up above and get rid of the annoying specific logic. I say annoying because it's no longer relevant in this event handler specifically. So I'm not going to be loading anything because we're not doing any persistent data stuff yet. We will talk about that in a later video. My new mantra. In this case, I also don't have output values anymore, so I can get rid of that. I'm doing some code cleanup as we go. If you have a bunch of these grayed out using statements at the top, you can actually either highlight them all and then click on your light bulb and remove unnecessary usings, or you can just throw your cursor somewhere in the using statements, hit Alt-Enter, oops, Alt-Enter, and then Enter again will remove unnecessary usings. So now I have this add value, which will add a value to the list of items. That's on the right hand side. That is this here. But I also have this create. So, and we are going to, oh, that's the other thing we need. Yes, that is correct. I made a mistake. I removed an event handler before removing its call from here. So If you're going to remove an event handler in Windows Forms, you actually need to go to the control on the front end, if it's designed in the front end, and you're going to go to the lightning bolt, find where that specific event handler is, make sure you remove it and hit enter to fully remove and apply the change, and then you can go back and remove your event handler from the code, because they are tied together in another class outside of what you've been dealing with. It's called the designer class, and it's important that you try not to edit that unless you really know what you're doing, because it can cause some serious compilation errors and some confusion too if you don't understand events yet, which I wouldn't blame you if you don't. We haven't gotten into it in this class yet. So form 1, we have our add grocery list value, we have our create list value, and what this will do is if text grocery list name dot text does not equal empty, we're going to go list grocery lists dot items dot add the text grocery list name dot text, and that essentially says that if we don't have, or if we have text in the grocery list name and we hit the create button, it will add that list name to our grocery list box. If you don't want people being able to hit space and then create, you're going to have to go to this here and do a dot trim. Trim is something inherent in the string class, and it allows you to remove the preceding and proceeding, or the prefix and postfix spaces, white space, from a word or a phrase. In this case, if they were to just hit the spacebar and hit create without trim, it would allow them to create an empty named list, which you can absolutely allow people to do. That's up to you, and depending on how you want to handle data. I don't personally like letting people do empty name values for things. So from here now, we want to double click our grocery list because we want this event handler for when we choose a list. We want to be able to populate all the items on the right hand side. I also want to, let's do a to-do list here. To-do, populate list name in title, to-do, populate list created date in title in square brackets, and to-do, populate list of items based on the list name. The other thing that I need to check when you go to create a list, we're going to do an AND operator for our second conditional. If you don't remember conditionals, previous episode, check it out. Actually, let's try out something new. If you have not seen the episode about conditionals, check out the card in the upper right hand corner of the YouTube video screen, and I will link that video there. In this case, I want to check to make sure that the list of grocery lists, the items that contains the text grocery list name dot text dot trim. And actually, I want to make sure that it doesn't contain that. I don't want to make a list with the same name. Now, there's an there's a better and cleaner way to write this, because we're calling this text grocery list name twice. What's that arguing about? Oh, I forgot a parentheses. We're calling this trim function here. We can actually split this out into a primitive ahead of time. So var trimmed list name equals that, and then we can grab this trimmed list name, put it there, and put it there. That way we only have to trim that string once, and we're always working with the exact same list name value, regardless. It's always going to be whatever is passed into this variable, or this variable is set to. And technically, we can throw it here too, if we really want to. So, if our current list of grocery lists does not contain our list or our grocery list name, we're going to add it. Cool. When we select it, though, we need to now populate the front end with information. Well, we know that we're going to be, I can get rid of those global variables. We know that we're going to be handling a list of grocery lists because we have this list box here. So list, and remember, we've done a list string, we've done list int, we've done iterators, we've done things like that. This is going to be no different. Instead of passing in string or int or whatever for our dynamic list, we're actually going to create a grocery list. But it's not in the tooltips. But I know that that's the name of my variable because it's right there. Like, it's right in my Solution Explorer here. It's right here. I've typed it properly, but we don't have a using statement pointing to firstApplication.objects. You can absolutely go up top here and type in using firstApplication.objects, and grocery list validates. It is a type. The other thing you can do, because this does happen in other cases, you can hit Alt-Enter and it'll automatically give you the list of viable options. If it does not populate, you may have typed in or may have run into private class, which means that, I guess in this case it's not going to let me do that, but you might have a private class that is inaccessible to this from inside of the class, because private would only allow you to access within this particular file. Hazy on that. I'll have to look that up later. I don't use private a whole lot. Usually if something is private, it's auto-generated from me. I use internal more than I do private. We'll get into access modifiers sometime. Probably when we get into application security. I think I've mentioned that in another video, actually. Starting to get to a point where I can't remember what I've talked about, which is really not uncommon because I can't remember what I ate for dinner yesterday. What did I eat for dinner yesterday? Now it's got me wondering. Brisket. Brisket? Yes. Brisket and... Oh, my wife made keto grilled cheese. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. If I can't remember something and I am conscious that I can't remember something, I have to stop and think, what was that? Which, actually, you probably saw in the last video, because the last video, I totally forgot to talk about debugger.isAttached until, like, the very end. So, list grocery list. Back at it. We're creating a list of our custom variable. This is probably the more complex way to do this, but it's also the most practical that I run into almost all the time. So we're going to do list grocery list. It also covers all of our bases for implementation, I think. And we're not covering static in this right now because static classes are another thing that you don't instantiate and da-da-da-da-da. This is going to be a long video, isn't it? What's new, Steven? Woo! So list grocery list. So we are going to create a list in our class of our custom variable type. We're going to call it all grocery lists. And we're creating a new instance of it. How to explain instances? So you have a recipe for a cake. And it's a cake that you have written down or has been given to you, this recipe, and you want to make it. You have ingredients like flour, eggs, baking soda, baking powder, probably some vanilla. I don't know how to bake a cake from scratch. But you have this recipe for a cake, and you want to make this. So you get your recipe, which in this case is a class. Then you hop over and you want to make this. So you get all your ingredients out onto your counter, and you start following the recipe to create a cake, to make the batter for a cake. We're going to instantiate. When you create the batter is a chemical reaction. You can't separate all the parts out and pull the flour out of a wet batter. So you've now made a batter out of the recipe, and you just haven't baked it yet. That gets into a rabbit hole. You have a cake that you've now made. That is an instance of the recipe that you have followed. You've taken all the ingredients from the recipe and followed all the directions. The edible cake, the finished product, is a manifestation of that recipe. An instantiated object is an instance. Instantiate means to create an instance of. Is an instance of that recipe, but it is not the recipe itself. Does that make sense? You can follow a recipe, but you're not going to eat the recipe as though it's cake. You're going to have a cake because you read the recipe. In this case, our recipe is grocery list, or it's actually a list of grocery lists. We've named it something. Triple chocolate, or let's say German chocolate cake. We have a German chocolate cake, and we're going to create, based on the recipe of list of grocery lists, a new cake. So, German chocolate cake, edible cake, equals a new cake that I can eat physically, like just chow down on. Great. That is instantiation. The same could be said for cars. If you're more of a car person, think of the schematic or the blueprints for a car or even a building as your class, your recipe, your design. And when you take ingredients or components and you put them together in a specific way, you get an instance of a building. Think or a car. Think like the Ford Model T. You have a bunch of those out on the road. Think a community of cookie cutter houses or condos or townhouses, apartment complexes. An apartment is an instance of a recipe or a blueprint of an apartment design. You'll see what I'm talking about, hopefully, when we go to actually create the list. Or when we actually populate the list. So we've created a list of grocery lists. This is now an instance of a list of grocery lists. And it is empty. It has no items whatsoever. But it is not null. It has properties, but it doesn't have items in it. When we go to our list of, or to create our list, not only do we have to add the name to the front end of the application, to the user experience, we also need to all grocery lists. We now need to add a new grocery list. And make sure you do your parentheses at the end. But the problem with doing it this way is the grocery list no longer has doesn't have a name. So it's just going to be empty in the list. How do we remedy that? My personal preference is to break out that just like this. And now we can say new glist.name equals our text grocery list, or actually no, I want to do this one because we did our trimmed list name. And because I want to edit it all in one place, but that's going to throw an error as well, or actually won't throw an error, it'll be a semantic issue, or a semantic error. We need to do new glist.name in our front end list, but we want the entire list object to go into our all grocery lists list. Have I said the word list enough? For a guy with a lisp. A little bit of onomatopoeia puns. Cut that out. That was so bad. Sorry, I need a drink. So now we have the ability to create a new list and add it to here. Let's test our logic real quick and just make sure everything's good. You can't test enough, and that can be arguable with time, but I don't think you can test enough. So let's try to create. Trimmed list name is empty, so this should skip over. Perfect. Let's say this is called a test list. We're going to hit create. It says test. And I can actually demonstrate for you what the trim does. So trimmed list name, and this does not, so this should evaluate to true. I hit F5 instead of F10, but let's do this. Let's do test 1 and then space. And actually let's do space ahead of time. So space test 1 space. I'm going to hit create. And so remember, space, test 1, space. Notice we don't have a space preceding or following test 1. The trim function gets rid of those spaces. So now we're going to step through. Because both of these conditions are true, our list grocery lists.items does not contain our trimmed list name, test 1, because it only has test in it. And it's not empty. It's not an empty string. We're going to enter into our if statement, or if block. We're going to create a new instance. We're going to create a new cake. And then we're going to give that cake a name. So new glist is our cake. You can hover over it, and there are our properties. You can see now it doesn't have any items in the list, but it does have the name, test 1. And created date, I haven't populated either. All grocery, so now it's on our front end, or it should be. You may not be able to see it because it hasn't loaded when you hover over your taskbar option. But all grocery lists, which currently has just the one test in it, now is going to add a glist, which has our test 1. So if you're following along, congratulations, you have made a complex object and stored it in memory in a list. Good job. That's actually really cool, and took me forever to figure out how that worked or what made sense. So good for you. Seriously. Let's add to it. Let's give it a created date. So our new glist property needs to have, before we add it to our lists so that it's saved in memory, we're going to go new glist dot created date equals, we haven't done dates. This is something that you'll have to memorize for just the moment, or maybe just in general. You don't do new date time. You can, but if you do, you have to pass in values. If we want to do just the current date that we are creating the object, we can do datetime.now. And datetime.now means upon the hitting of this particular line of code, we're going to grab the date and the time and we're going to store it in an object. For instance, if I go to create this, when I hit my breakpoint, it is 4:57:52 where I live, according to my system time. Notice that my clock right now says it's 4:58 458.06. But when I hit my breakpoint, when I went to create this object, it was 458.09. Or, oh no, it is updating now. Once I pass this, now it won't update. So this says 458.25. We're going to wait for this to hit 459, which, sorry, it's 30 seconds of burnt time, I know. But as this passes by, it's not going to update our date time variable, because created date is 458.24. It's currently 458.46. Cool? Cool. So now we have this test item. And remember, we're not saving this data anywhere but in memory. So as soon as this application is closed, it's gone forever. The data is. So now we need to do stuff. What we need to do is, if we want to add a grocery value, a grocery item, so to speak. Do we want to do that right now? No. Let's finish this out. So when we choose a grocery list item from the list in the user experience, the front end, so to speak, when a user clicks on a value, we're going to populate the list name in the title. So immediately this .title, actually, let's create a string builder, an interpolated string. Let's do var new title, new app title equals $, and we're going to do, we need to get the current object. So see, this is what happens when you don't design ahead of time, when you just think in the moment as you're coding. I need to create a var of the selected item, and I need to do my validation. So before we jump into that, we need to do if list groceries per, list grocery list dot selected index is greater than negative, no, it's less than 0. Actually, I want to do my return to break out so that I don't run into the syntax error. I need, yep, cool. Yep, cool. And then I need to grab the current selected value, not from the UI, but from our in-memory list. I think I covered it in the looping video, that you can, if you have two lists side by side that have the some same or correlated identifiable values, you can use a common index across them. If that boggles your mind, that's okay. Say I have a list with 3 items in it, 0, 1, and 2. If I select the value at index 1 on the front end, I should be able to select a grocery list equals, I should be able to grab that index and get the exact same value, or get the relevant value from the in-memory one. Let's actually visualize this real quick. I'm going to put a breakpoint here, and I'm going to create 3 lists. I'm going to create 1, 2, 3. Whoops. 1, 2, 4. All right. 1, 2, 3. These are our grocery lists currently. So 0, 1, and 2 indexes, right? So I'm going to select an object. In this case, I'm going to select the one titled 2. Remember, my front end has 1, 2, and 3. My grocery lists, or my all grocery lists, I have a count of 3 items of 0, 1, and 2. I've selected in the front end the one titled 2 in the first position of both the front end list and the back end, or the code behind list, named 2. Because the items in the lists are added at the exact same time and they are the exact same values, arguable later on down the road, because they are relevant to each other and they are added to at the same time with the same basic information, I can use the selected index from the front end to reference the exact object I want to in the back end. So in this case, my selected grocery list is going to be 2, because I've selected in the front end the index 1, which is also the relevant object index in the all grocery lists backend list. If that doesn't make sense, I apologize. I'm not sure how else to describe it. Not that it's a simple concept, but it's as correlative as I can get with it. If you need me to give another example, go ahead and throw something in the comments. I do read the comments. I'll try to get back as soon as I can. So that is getting the list value that I want to from my selected index. So therefore, I can go into my interpolated string here and do my curly brackets, go selected grocery list dot name, because we want the name and the title per our to-do list. I want to do dash created colon in square brackets following this here, and I can do selected grocery list dot date created, or created date rather, and my curly bracket. Oops. Like that. And that should be good. Now I need to do this dot, is it header? Is it title? It's title in WPF. It should be, is it name? What's my properties here? Oh, well. It's not name, it's going to be, oh, it's just this.text. Okay, I apologize. Earlier I said title, but in Windows Forms, it should be just this.text. This referring, in this case, because this is a contextual variable, this refers to, currently, this refers to the form that we're on, and the text is the title. So, and that'll set our title. So that actually completes these 2 items. Now I need to populate the list of items based on the list name. So I have my current selected grocery list. Now I want to do a for each, because we're going to loop. For each var item in selected grocery list, and we have this property, items. We're going to do LST. Actually, no, we're going to do curly brackets because I need to add to the front end and the back end. We're going to do, oh no, we're not doing add yet. We're doing just the population of these. So I should be able to just do list groceries per list items.add item. And this is a preference. If I have one line in my for each that is not creating or instantiating a new object, you can get rid of the curly brackets. So this compiles properly. There's a potential issue here though, and it's one that you should know anytime that you deal with the a nested list within an object you are dynamically creating, like we are doing here. You can try catch this, or you can prevent it altogether. We have not instantiated a list of strings for items. This would give us a null value. So if I hit start and I create a list, I choose that, object reference not set to an instance of an object. This means that items does not exist. It's null because we never, up here, never created an instance of a list of items for our new grocery list. New grocery list.items equals new list string prevents that error entirely. Now we'll hit start. We'll create test one. It works. There's our title. There's the created date time. Cool. But adding an item isn't going to do anything as of right now. Well, I guess it would add it to the front end list because we still have this text here, or this value here, right? And I should actually split this out once again to a variable. I'm doing the same validation that I did for my grocery list, trimmed item name, and the list, groceries per list, dot items. I always forget the bang ahead of time. Contains. Yep, so that should, oh, whoops, I want trimmed item name there. Cool. And now I have to do another check, actually. So I need to go list grocery lists dot selected index, if that is less than 0, return, because otherwise I'm going to try to add items to a list that is not selected, to a grocery list that's not selected. So I need to break that, and I need to get the current grocery list again. Now, you could break out current grocery list to a class level. That's acceptable. You could get it every time. The more memory conscious would do a global list. But I don't care about memory right now. And honestly, it can get a little bit complicated to reset the form and stuff like that. A little complicated. It's not fiercely difficult to do. We can talk about that when we get to a point where it makes more sense to have a global variable in relevance. Not to mention, by doing it this way, if there are any updates done from any other sources that we haven't anticipated, we're always getting the latest version of the list from memory. So in this case, we're just going to do var selected grocery list equals the, once again, the all grocery lists and list grocery lists dot selected index. Thank you for fixing my typos, Visual Studio. And now in here we're going to selected grocery list dot items dot add, and we're going to add that value there. Now, important to note that I have not created a delete function for this because I don't want to. It's not relevant really to the lesson either. When we get into persistent data, we can talk about proper CRUD operations and things like that, which are create, read, update, and delete. We'll also talk about CRUD operations in database access and database information, how to design and how to build out databases, and how to use them in C# in basic and more complex ways, because there are a number of ways to do it. Yeah, it's kind of the end of that thought, actually. Let's speed this up, shall we, Stephen? So now we have a grocery list test. We're going to create. My tab indexes are all off. We've got test. We've got our information here. We want to add, say, lettuce to our list. And I want to put a breakpoint here just to make sure that everything's working properly. I'm going to add my lettuce to my list. So we have a selected grocery list. It is the one entitled test. It has no items in it, but items is a list that is created. It has a created date. Trimmed item name is lettuce. It does not exist in the current list. And now we're going to add to the grocery list items list that particular value. And then in list groceries, this should pop up. And it's important to note here too that I can also scroll up to my all grocery lists because I've updated a child element of it. We've updated the actual list in memory, not just a temporary context variable. Hit F5 to continue my execution, and lettuce exists now. So if I create test2, I go here. Oh, why is it going back and forth? Well, why does it not clear out this value? Because we didn't tell it to. Computers are dumb. You have to tell them everything you want them to do, with some exceptions. AI is a really cool, complicated thing that I don't understand. Maybe one day I'll do an AI course, but not anytime soon. So, anytime you click on a list value for the groceries, and we've verified that the selected actually no, I want to do this before the selected index is shown. So here I want to do list groceries per list .items .clear, and that will clear out the entire list on the right hand side to make sure that we're not getting those duplicate values. So if I do test and then test2, now I should be able to add lettuce here, add. Then if I go to test2, nothing's there. But if I click test1 or test, it's there. Now if I add tomato to this one, I have lettuce and tomato. And my title is updating properly. Its created date and time is updated. And that is a complex variable. I think that's pretty much all I've got on this. I know I started out with a really abstract conversation about the human class and the individuals that would be inheritable physiologically from that. But the same concept applies to what we're doing here. For instance, and I know that I've popped to this particular shot, but it was because I thought I was going to go down to the end of the video. But real quick, I want to, and I will make this part quick because it's complicated, I'm going to create a lion object. Let's do here. We're going to create a lion. And we're going to give this a Boolean value. Has a main, I think that's how you spell main. Has string name. Prop. This will do string gender. Prop. Number of, whoops, we'll do int number of teeth. Prop double top speed. Prop bool is lazy. So we've got a bunch of properties here. And actually, let's get rid of has main. So we have a class of lion here. Now I want to create another class, and we're going to call this one lion male. And I want to give this lion main length. Oh, what? I always do that. Should be, let's say, double main length in centimeters. Yeah. has main length in centimeters. Well, if I were to go to grocery list, which not this particular one, I know this is ridiculous because what does a grocery list have to do with lions? But bear with me. If I were to create a lion class, lion equals new lion. I'm instantiating a lion. Oh, I have one other thing I have to cover. Constructors, which is a method function thing. So it'll be kind of split between 2 episodes. I'm doing this thing off camera with my fingers. So lion, you'll notice, has gender, is lazy, name, number of teeth, top speed, but it doesn't have our main length in centimeters. And if I try to create a lion male only has main length in cm, but a lion male is a lion. Why doesn't it have those properties? Because we haven't logically tied them together. So if I go to lion male and I want this to inherit those properties of lion, the superclass as it's known, or parent class you'll hear it known as well, or referred to, we're going to explicitly inherit those values by typing a colon and lion. C# is a non-multiple inheritance class, programming language. So you can only inherit from one superclass. The idea is that you would create a superclass with a subclass, with a subclass, with a subclass, with a subclass, more specifically, to be more, permutatable. No, you should be able to become more or less complex or more specific and granular based on where you're at in the hierarchy of inheritance. C++, I think, is a language that allows you to do multiple inheritance, which is handy at times, but also probably not the best design structure, or also not probably the best way to maintain your code. Likewise, you may have a class here called lion female. And in lion female, you would inherit lion. Again, not lion male, but you might have lion female, and you may have I don't know if male lions are territorial, but we'll say no for the sake of this. And we'll say double and territory threat radius, because maybe the female gets more territorial on a wider brim or something like that, and the male just doesn't get territorial. But we're going to go to form 1, and we're going to create a lion male. LM equals new lion male. LM dot, hey, there are all of our properties. And it does not have the territory one I just made. But if I go to lion female, I have territory threat radius, but I don't have main length. Lion female inherits from lion. Lion male inherits from lion. But they don't inherit from each other. So the more specific you get the more generic you get on the superclass, the more easily you'll be able to become granular for the specific and unique values to your inherited child classes, or your inherited child classes. So I'm going to get rid of my lion classes here, delete them, and go to my grocery list again. Why? Because I forgot to cover constructors. And again, this will be a split concept, but a constructor is essentially a method that allows you to specify what happens when you create an object. So when you go to bake the cake, do you want to specify all of the properties of that cake after the fact, after you've made it, or do you want to specify them as you're making them? It's a convenience thing. You can do it either way. It doesn't really matter. So So when I go to create a grocery list, I need to have what is known as a constructor. A constructor, and C# automatically creates a constructor, an empty one, implicitly, so you don't have to define one. But if you want to manipulate how the object is created, we can do it this way. And this is actually pretty handy because right now, and I'll show you how it can differ, but we'll do public grocery list and then open close parentheses. This is a constructor. It does not have a return type. It does not have parameters passed into it necessarily. It can. You can overload these. We'll get into overloading when we talk methods and functions, which I am certain will be the next episode, and it will be probably just as long as this one is, if not longer. But I hope not. I might be able to keep that one short. Not sure I'm going to construct that one yet. We're going to leave this one empty, and we're going to overload real quick after this one. So grocery list. When creating a grocery list, we're not going to set the name yet. Actually, yeah, let's just do this. We're going to, when you create a grocery list, we're going to force the programmer to enter in a name value for the grocery list right away, so that we can do this.name equals name. But then we can do created date equals datetime.now here. Oops, that's not a method. And items equals new there. Now, when you do this and you explicitly declare a constructor or create a constructor, Visual Studio will argue if you've already implemented this with the implicit one it handles. So we're going to double click that error, and it will show me there is no argument given that corresponds to the required formal parameter name of grocerylist.grocerylistString. So instead of doing all of this stuff down here, I can pass my trimmed list name into that variable and get rid of all the other stuff after the fact, because I'm already creating this. I'm already handling all of that automatically when creating an instance of the object that I'm working with. Now, you can create multiple constructors, but they can't have the same signature, which means they can't have all the same arguments. In this case, I could say string name, but it's going to argue with me because I already have a member defined called CTOR, its constructor, with the same parameter types. So I'm going to declare that I want created date, time, right? Date time, created date. Typos, man. And then we're going to do list string items. And then you could do, because in this case, by the way, this refers to grocery list. The easy way to know what this is referencing is you can double click on this to highlight the entire word, and it will show you what it's referencing, which is the parent class, in this case, grocery list, not the form that we were talking about earlier. In this case, I want to do this.name equals name, this.created date equals created date, and this.items equals items. And when you would use this is when you're doing data persistence. So if we were saving this to a file or to a database, when you load up the object from your data source, file or database, you would just automatically populate it when you create your grocery list. Because then I could just come in here and do datetime.now, and then technically I could do this, and that would be totally valid as well. Or pass in whatever the data source has. We'll get into that when we talk about data sources and databases or files or what have you, which is coming soon. I think file I/O will be the next one that I do, and how I go about file I/O. There are a lot of ways to do input output, but yeah. Anyway, so that's the basics of complex types, complex variables. So if you have questions, which I anticipate you will, please feel free to throw those questions in the comments below. Grab that timestamp from the video. You can just right click the video, hit copy video at current time, throw that in the comment as well so I know exactly what you're talking about, and I will try to get back to it or get to it as soon as possible. I might address it address it as a video if it's complex enough, or if I think it's going to be more useful for everybody that's watching to learn from. Otherwise, I'll just reply back to your comment right then and there. Yeah. Other than that, thanks for watching, and until next time, take it easy.